Hey, welcome to the Eternal Archivist. I am your host, the Archivist, and I am very excited to be sitting here with you to introduce you to this brand new channel. So if you like the strange, the mysterious, or the downright weird, or if you like to just listen to me talk, then you've come to the right place. Now, please like and subscribe if you enjoy this video, because I would love to be able to bring you more stories like this each week. And I do plan on releasing about 2 videos a week. So, without further ado, let's get on into it. Now, I do want to preface this video by saying this is the conclusion that I've come to after extensively researching the topic so that you don't have to. So, we're going to be talking about Fallout, the Fallout universe, and more importantly with today's video, we're going to be talking about who dropped the bombs first. So, we're going to give you a pretty good timeline starting from the year 2050 all the way to the year of 2077 from the moment the bombs dropped, and we're going to do a deep dive into what exactly happened and who I have come to the conclusion of has dropped the bombs. So let's get started with this. So we're going to start in the year of 2050. Now keep in mind, the Fallout universe is very, very similar in history and everything as just like our universe. So they've got all the same history that we do all the way up to World War II, very similar to us. The main difference in the Fallout universe is they didn't really focus on micro technologies. So instead of developing things like cell phones, tablets, smartwatches, they focused on other things like energy and resources. But they are just as advanced, if not more advanced, than we are. So let's go ahead and start at the year 2050. In 2050, the highest levels of the government, such as the president, the cabinet, state governors, Supreme Court judges, even extremely wealthy individuals like CEOs or titans of industries. I mean, we had companies like Vault-Tec, West-Tech, Robco, Big Mountain, and that's just a few. But they were given massive government contracts. So all of these groups, the president, all these companies, these Supreme Court judges, these state senators, they all came together and they created a group called the Enclave. Now, the Enclave would basically pull the strings and they would control all aspects of America. Their end goal was being world domination. And now that we have the established group of the Enclave, we can move to the year of 2051. And in the year of 2051, the Enclave-controlled America begins its annexation of Mexico. America wanted its oil fields, it wanted everything that Mexico had as far as resources, but mainly oil. So America began to do horrible economic sanctions on Mexico so that it could destabilize the government, destabilize the economy, and move in and essentially take over the resources, which they eventually did. They moved their military, they annexed Mexico, invaded Mexico, and just completely took over their oil fields and began to make sure that the oil fields and the supply of oil could be sent back up through the pipelines. Now we can move to the year of 2052. In 2052, the oil industries came to an all-time collapse. It was horrible globally. So there were documentaries, all sorts of stuff. I mean, there was one thing in the Fallout series even showing that the Texas oil fields in 2052 had gone completely dry. There was nothing left. So the oil industry at this point is on major collapse, and all the countries around the world are trying to figure out what to do. They need resources, and one of their biggest resources has now collapsed. And that moves us into later into the year of 2052. We are now in the month of April of 2052, and this is when the resource wars begin. Many smaller nations go completely bankrupt, and they are invaded by countries like America, China, and other places. Europe, being completely desperate for oil, responds to the raising oil prices in the Middle East by invading the Middle East with the European Union Army. So this culminates into the resource wars, which are between the European Union and the Middle East. And it is a very, very long and fought war. basically with Europe trying to take all of the Middle East oil for their resources. Now we can move into May of 2052. The United Nations are now beginning to collapse due to this resource crisis, and people are freaking out. Many nations within the UN begin to withdraw, and the UN is completely disbanded by July of 2052. Now we move into the year of 2053. The Enclave has began researching and testing biological warfare, basically creating very bad stuff for human beings that will give them plagues, viruses, and all that good stuff. In their research and testing into biological warfare, they created something that they called the New Plague. And the New Plague was extremely deadly. It had almost a 100% kill rate. Due to, who knows, I mean, they never explained how it got released. It could have been stupidity, it could have been whatever. But somehow, this New Plague was released. It got out of one of the West Tech research facilities, and it was released across America. Because of this, America closes its borders for the first time in history, and they have a nationwide quarantine to stop the spread of the New Plague. And they were pretty successful in quarantining the states, or the commonwealths, I should say, that needed to be quarantined so that they could stop the spread. But that being said, the damage was already done, and now you have this New Plague that's just causing havoc across America. And with that, we can move into December of 2053. In December of 2053, something insane happened. A nuclear bomb was dropped on the city of Israel. No one knows who dropped this bomb. No one knows where the bomb came from. Just somehow a massive nuclear explosion happened in Israel, and it was considered a terrorist attack. Now, because of this devastating nuclear attack on the city of Israel, this created massive problems between the European Union Army and the Middle Eastern Army, because neither side really knew who did this. And it very well possibly could have been neither of them, which is even scarier. And with that, we move further into the year of 2054. Due to this devastating nuclear strike on the city of Israel, the armies of Europe launched a concentrated nuclear strike on the Middle East. This was devastating to the Middle East, and it really did put the resource war to a kind of grinding halt between the Europeans and the Middle Easterns. At this point, it's actually called the Euro-Middle Eastern War, or the Euro-Middle Eastern conflict. So because Europe has sent a large amount of nuclear payloads to the Middle East and did a bunch of concentrated blasts, this is pretty much the first time we see a major nuclear exchange in the Fallout universe. Now, due to the Euro-Middle Eastern nuclear conflict that happened, and the release of the New Plague all happening in the year of 2054, the Enclave was beginning to get a little worried. So now, they begin to make the plan, or the Project Safe House. And what Project Safe House was intended to do was build vaults all across America, so that the citizens of America could have shelter in the possibility of a nuclear exchange or a biological attack that could possibly happen on America. So the Enclave hired Vault-Tec, and they gave Vault-Tec a massive government contract to begin developing vaults all across America for the citizens, but not only for the citizens, they did this for themselves. So the very first vaults that Vault-Tec began to construct were vaults for the Enclave and vaults for Vault-Tec personnel. The development of the vaults was very rapid. So honestly, by 2055, they had most vaults developed. And they continued to keep making new and more vaults for the citizens of America just in case something were to happen. So the Enclave is already kind of preparing for something to go down. Now we move further into the year of 2054. So we're still in 2054. Now, at the very end of the year of that year, Vault-Tec creates ZAX 1.0 or ZAX 1.0. This was initially a prototype for the systems that were going to maintain and govern all the vaults throughout Vault-Tec's industry. So all the vaults that they have made, this system was initially going to maintain all the vaults and govern everything. So it was basically a glorified babysitter. Now, Vault-Tec was forced to turn over this equipment to the Enclave. And the Enclave basically used it and gave it to the Department of Energy so that they could collect resource data. And within about a year, the ZAX 1.0 was taken from the Department of Energy and given to West-Tec. So now this device has changed hands about twice. So Vault-Tec developed ZAX 1.0, the Enclave took it and gave it to the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy didn't really do anything with it, so then the Enclave took it again and they gave it to West-Tec. So now West-Tec is in possession of this machine called ZAX 1.0. And West-Tec then begins to use it for plague research and tactical research. And with that, they create ZAX 1.2. And with that, we move to the year of 2055. So we're moving on up. We're no longer in 2054. Now, the West-Tec research facility begins work on a brand new virus. And they're developing this virus kind of as a vaccine for the new plague. So they're not really developing this virus as a way to combat anyone or to fight anyone. This virus that they're making, its initial purposes were to help create a vaccine for the new plague that they themselves created and it got loose. So this vaccine, or this virus that they were developing, its main purpose, what it did to the human body was what it did to anybody that it came into contact with, is it made them extremely resistant to diseases, radiation, basically anything. Ballistics, knives. It also made them grow and develop muscle mass and just to get very big. So all in all, it made your body, or made whatever it came into contact with, evolve and develop and grow more and more. And now we are going to move on to the year of 2059. So we're taking a big leap here. We just jumped up 4 years. We went from 2055 to 2059. So in the year of 2059, the Enclave establishes the Anchorage Frontline. And I'm sure a lot of you gamers out there, you're aware of Anchorage. So the Enclave has established the Anchorage Frontline. And this is to increase its military presence in Alaska and basically to protect the Alaskan oil fields. Because at this point, the Alaskan oil fields are like the last reserve of oil. There's really nothing left. That's one of their main energy resources, and Alaska's pretty much got the last of it. So the Enclave sends a very big military presence to Alaska to obviously protect that. And in doing so, Canada starts to feel very, very pressured by America. Canada starts to feel like maybe America's up to something other than protecting the oil fields, because remember, America did annex and completely take over Mexico. So tensions begin to rise between the Canadians and the Americans. And honestly, Americans didn't care. The Enclave just kept on sending its forces where they needed them to go, and they actually pushed them more and more into Canadian territory. So you can start to see that now the Enclave, in the guise of, oh, we're going to protect our oil fields, they've gone from annexing Mexico for oil fields. Now they're starting to move their units into Canada. and they're going to eventually annex Canada as well. And with that, we'll move to the year of 2060. In 2060, and this is actually pretty cool, in 2060, the very first artificial intelligence is established, is created. So the very first AI. It is developed by West Tech, and it was more than likely the ZAX 1.2 that they developed out of the ZAX 1.0. So I believe that this AI that they have created was originally kind of created by Vault Tech to maintain and govern the vaults. West Tech took that from them, or better yet, the Enclave took it from them and gave it to West Tech. And West Tech then turned it into an artificial intelligence. And that artificial intelligence would be given to the Enclave so that the Enclave could then use it for their purposes. Now we move a couple months into 2060. Now, the oil reserves have, at this point, they're run dry. They're gone. So they have completely run dry. Fuel has become so expensive that people can't even afford to fill up their car. Like, they can't even get a gallon of gas for their cars. I mean, I'm sure you've seen in some of the video games or in some of the other art that's out there, the gas signs that are up, and it's like $1,000 for a gallon of gas. So at this point, it's just gotten crazy. Oil's basically gone. No one can fuel their cars, and the global giants of the world, basically like America, China, all the major nations, they began realizing we need to find an alternative source of fuel, an alternative source of energy, so that we can continue to sustain. And at this point, they begin exploring electricity and they begin exploring fusion, so electric and fusion cars. And within the better part of a year, fusion cars were created. Now, they were very expensive vehicles, but that's what we moved to. So we went from having gas and oil cars, and now we're driving in electric fusion cars. So pretty cool. Now we move a little bit further into a year. We're going to go up a couple more months. So we're still in the year of 2060. Now, the European Middle Eastern conflict comes to a complete end. It's done. And the reason being is because the oil is all gone. So they have no reason to fight anymore. They've basically completely destroyed themselves at this point because they've had a nuclear exchange between, the Middle East and Europe, and they're done fighting. So Europe leads the Middle East, and they completely take their military back, what's left of it, because it's devastated. And the Middle East kind of retreats as well, and both of them being completely devastated by the war that they both just had with themselves. And now we move into the year of 2063. In 2063, the construction of most vaults has been complete. It's finished. Almost every vault is done. And major cities across America begin to practice safety drills for these vaults, if you will. So, and this is well before the bombs dropped. We're talking many years before the bombs dropped. But because all these vaults have been developed, all of these major cities are now doing safety drills to kind of get people in preparation for what if a bomb drops. Kind of like, if you have a fire drill at school. So, because these cities continue to keep doing these practice drills, people kind of stop showing up. They stop doing the drills because they're like, at this point it's like the boy who cried wolf. Sorry, had a little bit of a mishap there, but it's like the boy who cried wolf. So they're thinking it's not really going to happen. It's more so just a waste of their time. A bomb's never going to drop. We're going to be totally good. So they stop taking these drills seriously, and people kind of go on with their lives and even really forget that the vaults were a thing, that they even exist. Now we're going to move to the year 2065. Now, in the year 2065, something pretty crazy happened. Because of the massive demand on resources that was going on, and the fact that America basically had no resources at this point, a nuclear reactor in New York City goes critical and almost has a meltdown. Now, because of this meltdown, and because of the situation that happened, people begin to do power rationing, which means they ration their energy, their power. So to turn the lights on, to use the water, to do anything in their house, they now had to ration that. And this was across the entire United States. So we can tell now by the point of 2065, things are starting to get bad. Like, things are affecting even the citizens, the common citizens of America, and even globally, things are just kind of escalating and getting worse. So now with that, we're going to move to the year of 2065 again. We're still in 2065, so we're just going to go up a couple of months. Now we're in the month of August of 2065. Now, in the month of August of 2065, Westech begins construction of a man-based tank, a two-legged walking armor unit, otherwise known as power armor. And I'm sure you are all aware of power armor. So in 2065, that's when Westech begins its initial development of power armor for the American military. Now, from 2065 to 2067, so about a 2-year window there, obviously, power armor research and development grows exponentially. So several prototypes are created, many of which are not suitable for warfare and not suitable to go out into the field, but because of those prototypes, they paved the way for the future suits of power armor. So they were horrible when they came out, those first ones, but they definitely, with each new prototype, we got closer and closer to perfecting the power armor that we would eventually see in the Fallout series. Now, in 2067, so we have, that whole thing took about 2 years, the development of power armor, so it was from 2065 to 2067. So we're still in 2067. So at this point, in 2067, gotta say it a third time, China's fuel resources have dried up. This is causing an energy crisis for their nation like they've never seen before. China is in almost complete collapse at this point because their fuel resources are gone. So China at this point becomes very, very aggressive, and they get even more aggressive with their trade talks with America. The trade talks do not go well, as I'm sure you can guess. I mean, when do they ever? And because of this, the relationship between America and China gets very bad very quickly. Because China is in a crisis, they don't have resources, they want to work with America to better their situation, but America will not have anything to do with them. So now China's getting very mad, and the situation is going to get worse. So now we're going to move on. We're still in the year 2067. There's actually quite a lot of things that happen in the year 2067. So later on into that year, the very first fusion core is created. So fusion cores are a major deal, and this was created as a result to the power armor research that they were doing and conducting. So America then incorporated the fusion core into the general United States infrastructure. So now we were doing the power rationing, but because we have this fusion core, we can now have power again. So they sent that throughout the American infrastructure, and businesses, companies, apartments, houses, they all start using it for their energy resource. Now, again, we're still in 2067. So, because as I mentioned, a lot happens in this year. So later on in 2067, America begins its official annexation of Canada, just like it did to Mexico. So we can already kind of see the trend of what's going on with the Enclave. Now, because America annexes Canada and they kind of have their military all over the world, like America has invaded a lot of smaller countries and annexed others, just taking territories left and right. So they do have their military basically everywhere. So at this point, because China is very, I want to say desperate, because they don't have the resources that they need and America refuses to work with them, China invades Alaska and they invade Anchorage. Anchorage becomes basically the front. It becomes the very first battleground of the American war against communism, as it would be known. So yeah, that just happened. So we're in 2067, and now the official war between America and Communist China has begun. China has started this war by invading Anchorage for its oil resources. Now, in the end of 2067, so I would say whenever China invaded Anchorage. It was probably, I would say, around September. So there were a few months left in the year. Now we cut to December of 2067. The very first suit of power armor is finally ready, and it's going to be deployed. And the very first place it's going to be deployed to, I'm sure you can guess, is Anchorage. So the T-45 power armor is incredibly effective against the Chinese infantry, the Chinese tanks. Everything they have in their military just gets destroyed by the T-45. The T-45 is, as it's been described, a walking tank. And I mean, its ability to carry heavy payloads and just completely destroy entire towns without harming the person inside just made them very crucial for the whole war between America and China. Because of the success with the power armor suits that America had developed, China begins working on their own armor. They begin working on stealth armor, and they're doing this so that they can combat the power armor. And that gets pretty interesting, honestly. So now we're going to move to the year of 2069. In 2069, America continues its annexation of Canada. So they are completely invading. They're already in Canada. They've invaded it completely. And now, because of the annexation, they are stripping Canada of its resources, just like they did to Mexico. So forests, massive forests are being ripped from the ground, timber, anything they can find, honestly, any resource, anything that America can take, they're taking it. So Canada is getting stripped bare. And honestly, the annexation of Canada is totally complete by the year 2069. So now it's a part of America at this point, and America has taken all of its resources. So now we're going to move to 2070. So we're getting there. I know you guys are waiting. You're waiting for the big boom, but we're getting there. So in the year 2070, many smaller nations have been completely taken over by America, China, and Europe. And they're beginning to riot. They're going crazy. They don't have it, as you can imagine, America, China, Europe, they don't really have that many resources right now. The resources across the globe are running dry. So imagine how these smaller nations feel, not having the type of resources that even they have. So these smaller nations must be suffering. They don't have anything. So at this point, all of these smaller nations that have been taken over by the big three, America, Europe, and China, they're beginning to riot. They're beginning to lash out and fight out over what's been happening. And this does cause quite a stir globally, because these are countries across the globe and riots are just happening left and right. So now we're going to move to 2073. So from the year 2070 all the way to the year of 2073, the war between America and China continues, and it's very bloody. So at this point, with the Chinese being defeated at Anchorage and getting destroyed by the American power armor, America has begun to invade Chinese territories. So after America's success at Anchorage, they immediately got their military, created a power armor corps, they created a whole unit of people wearing power armor. They sent almost all of their military to Chinese territories so that they can invade and take over. So I know they say don't put all of your eggs in one basket. I don't know what the saying is. I'm sorry. But it seems like that's kind of what America did here. So America kind of just sent almost all of their military to China. And what happens if the military fails? What happens if it loses? America has no military to defend itself. And that's kind of where we get to. So back to this 2070 to 2073, the war between America and China is at its bloodiest. America is making ground. They're definitely making ground because they have the power armor. So they are cutting a swath through the Chinese territories, and they're getting closer and closer to the Chinese capital. Now, because of this, China is getting a little afraid, so they also start to use biological weapons. They're getting beaten pretty bad by the power armor, so they start using mustard gas, just a lot of different biological weapons to kind of up the ante, right? Or to even out the playing field, I guess is a better term. Now, when we get to September of 2073, to combat the biological weapons that China has been using, the Pan-Immunity Virion Project begins at West Tech. And if that sounded like just a bunch of crazy words to you, then it also did to me, trust me. Yeah, let's say that again. The Pan-Immunity Virion Project. Cool. So yeah, this project was started at West Tech, and this was in September of 2073. Now we're going to move to 2074. American power armor units have deployed in China. They're fighting their way to the capital, like I mentioned before, but at this point, they're starting to get bogged down. It's not really the Chinese military that's doing it, it's actually the environment, the terrain. So the muddy, wet terrain is beginning to really halt the progression of the American front, or the American vanguard, their military, into the Chinese territories, because they're getting bogged down, they're getting stuck in this muddy, swampy terrain because they're wearing these suits of power armor that weigh probably a ton, literally a ton, and they're having to walk through it. And because of that, the Chinese are able to maneuver around them or get in close, and the Chinese are really taking advantage of that situation and destroying the power armor units that are out there. And China is also getting its allies involved at this point. So the American military that has invaded China, they are really getting their butts kicked right now, at least in 2074. So now we move to 2075. In 2075, FEV experiments continue at West Tech. Now, if you don't remember what FEV is what West Tech developed to make a cure for the new plague. And FEV is actually called the Forced Evolutionary Virus. And it does exactly what it's called. So the Forced Evolutionary Virus forces you to evolve, to suit your surroundings or to suit your needs. That's what it does. And they created this to make, I guess, it initially started as a cure for the new plague, but I honestly believe that they got to a point where they were just trying to make a new human, the next stage in human evolution, So they are doing their FEV experiments in 2075. This is going on at Mariposa Research Facility. Now, in a wave of all these successful tests that they've been doing on single-celled organisms, they now begin to test FEV on other species. And it kind of goes up the ladder. So, they start with single-celled organisms, they move to insects, and then from insects they move to like rodents, raccoons, they eventually move on to monkeys, and then they move on to humans. When it gets to humans, all of it's bad, but how they were getting their human subjects, they were prisoners of war. They were the Chinese prisoners of war that were being brought over. Mariposa would take them, which was the West Tech Research Facility, and they would experiment their FEV on them. Now, there's so much we can go into when it comes to West Tech, and honestly, all of these different corporations. I'm going to make a separate video about all these other corporations, so trust me, I'm sure you want to hear about the nitty-gritty and the crazy things that West Tech and Vault Tech and all these other corps have done, and I will make those videos for you, I promise. But for right now, we're going to stick to just the bombs dropping. So now we're going to move to May of 2075. So the FEV tests are continuing at Mariposa. They keep going up the line. At this point, they're testing them on humans. It's getting bad. There is a security staff at Mariposa, and it's run by Captain Maxon. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should, because he's the ancestor of the Brotherhood of Steel, basically. He started the Brotherhood of Steel, and all of his descendants, their last names are Maxon. So if you ever came across an Elder Maxon or a Maxon in one of the Fallout games, they were one of his descendants. So anyway, he was head of security at Mariposa, and West Tech was basically hiding all their experiments with FEV, so he had no idea this was happening at the facility that he was supposed to be the security for. So now we're going to move to 2076. We are so close, we're getting there. Now, China has completed their stealth field technology, and they have now created stealth suits. These are suits that basically make them go completely invisible because they have now mastered stealth field technology. And because of this, they begin to work on a fleet of stealth military vehicles. For example, nuclear submarines that they can turn invisible. So if you can imagine just how crazy and deadly that sounds, yeah, that's what we're working with. We have invisible nuclear submarines that China is now developing in this. So they actually secretly complete this work towards the end of the year. So by the end of 2076, China has completed creation of an invisible nuclear submarine fleet. Now we're going to move to the very end of 2076. So the year's almost up. The war is still going over in China. The American forces are being decimated though, but the war continues, so it's still going. But because of this, riots are happening across the globe, and they're happening in American cities and Chinese cities now too. So now it's not just riots are happening in these small countries that America and China have taken over. Now these riots are happening at home. They're happening in the major cities, and it's because this war has had a major strain on our resources, on all the resources. I mean, there was little to no resources to begin with. Now you have this massive conflict, this war between America and China, or should I say the Enclave in China, and the resources have run dry. So everyone is rioting at this point, and it is getting very bad. Not only that, but American soldiers, the units that have invaded Chinese territories, they're beginning to lose ground instead of gain ground. So at first they had a very good gain. I mean, they just kept on going, they kept on pushing because the power armor was helping them. But because of the terrain, the muddy terrain, and everything else, at this point they're starting to lose, and they're losing quickly. They're losing a lot of ground. So now we're going to move to the year 2077. And if you're a Fallout fan, I am sure you know what that year means, what it signifies. So in the early months of 2077, the American forces have all but been defeated. They're basically done. Their power armor has failed them because of the muddy terrain, and I guess they just really didn't design the suits for that. They didn't think about it, which was dumb on their part, but you know. So at this point, the American forces have been depleted, and the American forces have lost. So people are starting to get scared. There's no contact from any of the generals, any of the military forces that are over in China. So at this point, the Enclave has come to the conclusion that they have basically lost the ground war, if you will. And they begin to think of what needs to be done next. And that's when we get very close to the end of our timeline here before the bombs dropped. Now, on October 3rd of 2077, the Enclave, as well as a majority of Vault-Tec personnel, secretly begin to head to their respective vaults. Once they were secured inside their vaults, they begin to make a contingency plan to stop China. Now, we don't know what this contingency plan was. There's no details to say what they discussed, what the plan was about, what they were trying to do. We just know what the goal of the contingency plan was, and that was to stop China. And remember, this is October 3rd. Now we move to October 20th of 2077, 17 days later. Captain Maxim, the guy that I mentioned before, that was the head of security at West Tech, or at the Mariposa Research Facility, he discovers the horrors and atrocities that the science team has been committing on the prisoners of war that I mentioned before. When he discovers this, he basically assigns all of the science staff, everyone that was in the science and research teams, he executes them. So he and his security team take them out and they execute them. And once all of the scientists in Mariposa were executed, Captain Maxim went and found a government radio that would essentially allow him to speak over the government airwaves, and it would contact all heads of the government. So once he got on this radio, he announced that himself and all of his men are no longer part of America. They are their own thing. Because of the atrocities that America allowed happen at this facility, they will no longer be a part of America anymore. Now, Captain Maxim definitely expected some kind of retaliation whenever he made this claim over government airways. He definitely expected for the American government or the military to come to Mariposa immediately and put a stop to them. But instead of that, it was silence. Dead silence. There was no repeating, like no one said anything to them. No one asked what's going on. No one reached out. He made this message over the government airways and no one responded, which is pretty crazy considering how big the government is, and there's always people that are listening to that. You know, they got the radio guys. So the fact that no one responded means that there was no one to listen, no one to hear them, or no one cared. You know, someone did hear them and they just didn't care to respond. Which would make sense because at this point the Enclave has retreated to their vaults. So you have to understand, the Enclave has retreated to their vaults, which means probably a big majority of the upper echelons of the American government have gone to their vaults, so they're not around. Now we move to October 23rd of 2077. And if you're a Fallout fan, you know exactly what this day means. So on October 23rd of 2077, Project Safehouse is initiated. The alarms for the vaults are sent out across America in an effort to get as many American citizens in these vaults. So they basically sent out these alarms. Every major city got them before anything happened, and citizens were told to make it to their vaults. Now, the citizens were given about an hour to get to their vaults before the first bombs dropped. And the first bombs began to drop on the East Coast and then the West Coast of America. And these bombs dropped for a total of 2 straight hours. Bombs dropped across the globe for 2 hours. So keep that in mind. It wasn't just America. For 2 hours, we had nukes hitting China, America, every continent across the globe. And it was hellfire. And after the 2 hours, and the bombs stopped, there was nothing but dead silence. All right, well, now we're gonna move to the synopsis of the video. Basically, the conclusion that I've come up with. Now, we have 3 people that could have possibly dropped the bomb first. And if we look at everything that we discussed today, I think we'll be able to come to the same conclusion. Now, the first person I'm going to talk about, or the first group that I'm going to talk about, is the Enclave. Now, the reasons that the Enclave, or the reasons I would give that the Enclave would have more than likely dropped the bombs first, is this. They have invaded and annexed many countries, time and time again, and they have absolutely no problem with taking over smaller countries or just stripping them of their resources. They also don't mind creating and using biological weapons on people. They've done it many times, and they've tested their biological weapons on prisoners of war. Now, they also have satellite dishes that are equipped with nukes, which means that they can get these satellites into the perfect position and launch a nuclear strike on anywhere in the world that they want to, and the nuke would basically hit where it needed to hit very quickly because the satellite's over where it needs to be. Now, with all that being said, they also knew to go to their vaults 20 days before the bombs dropped. So that's the most suspicious thing to me is, everything was going on. You know, the war was still going on. The American military had fallen, sure. But the Enclave, 20 days before the bombs dropped, decided to take all of their personnel, almost all of Vault-Tec's personnel, and go inside of their respective vaults and then begin planning on how to stop China. Now, if we look at Vault-Tec, Vault-Tec made a lot of money off of the Enclave. And they also wanted to keep the war going because of the monetary gain that they were receiving. They were making these vaults. So the Enclave was paying Vault-Tec a lot of money. So it is possible that Vault-Tec could have also dropped the bombs. I mean, if you think about it, the only theory I can really think of is possibly Vault-Tec tested a nuclear bomb within America, and the Americans, or the Enclave, didn't know that that was Vault-Tec. So Vault-Tec tested a nuke, and America thought it was China. So America then bombs China, and then China bombs America in retaliation. So if that is what happened, if Vault-Tec did test a nuclear bomb in America and essentially created this chain reaction of just a global nuclear event, that's the only plausible theory I can really think of. I don't see any other reason why or how Vault-Tec would have the means of dropping the first bomb, especially since they were just so much in the Enclave's pocket, and the Enclave controlled a lot of aspects of what the other corporations did, and Vault-Tec was part of the Enclave, just like West-Tec and all the other corps. And then the last people, or the last group we can talk about that may have dropped the bomb, is China. I mean, China defeated the American military. They developed a stealth field that they could use to send invisible nuclear subs to America's coastlines, all equipped with nukes. So, you know, they can, if a bomb were to drop in China, they could have those submarines retaliate immediately, which I do think that is what happened. But back to this. So, that being said, China was desperate for resources. Like, they were desperate. They needed resources. And I don't think that they would have destroyed the, basically the place that they were trying to take resources from. So if they wanted America's resources, why would they nuke America? That just doesn't make any sense. They needed America's resources. They wouldn't have wanted to do that. So for these reasons, I theorize that the Enclave planned to drop the bombs after the American military was defeated. So I think when the American military was defeated in early 2077, the Enclave and Vault-Tec went to their respective vaults. They came up with a contingency plan of what they were going to do. They basically put their satellites, their nuclear-armed satellites, in position, and then they initiated the Project Safe House alarms, which gave all the civilians about an hour to get to their vaults. During that hour, I think that they nuked Chinese territories and the capital of China, and basically all of Chinese territories. And because China had those submarines on our coast already, they were able to retaliate as quickly as they did. So they were able to retaliate within an hour, and they started by bombing the East Coast and the West Coast. So that's my conclusion today. That's what I think. You know, there are many theories out there. The Fallout lore when it comes to who drops the bombs first is very ambiguous. I don't think they've ever established that that this group actually did it. But just from all the research that I've done, this is the conclusion that I've come to as far as this is the group that dropped the bombs. I think it was the Enclave. So there you have it. And I also do want to say I greatly appreciate all of you who have stuck with me till the very end of this video. It means a lot. It really does. And if you liked it, please like and subscribe so I can keep doing what I love to do. And thank you for watching. I'll see you on our next venture into the archive.